So we're going to graph the rational function that we have given here and go through the same steps that we did with the last one. So first thing, we want to find our horizontal and vertical asymptotes. So to find the vertical asymptotes, let's set the bottom to 0. So I'm going to set x squared minus 4 to 0. And that does factor. And it factors as x minus 2. X plus 2. And let's set both of those factors to 0. And we get x minus 2 is 0. And we're getting a little doggy commentary in the background. And x plus 2 equals 0. Now this one gives me a positive 2. And this one gives me a negative 2. Now, remember, though, with vertical asymptotes, you have to check them in the numerator, because if they make the numerator 0, they're not vertical asymptotes. So if we take this 2 and put it right here, 2 plus 2 is 4. That's not 0, so this is a vertical asymptote. But if I take the negative 2 and put it in, negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So this is what we call a hole in the graph. And we'll see what we do about a hole in our last step as we get ready to graph. Okay, now, our horizontal asymptote, we compare. The degree on the top is a 1. The degree on the bottom is a 2. The top is smaller than the bottom, so the horizontal asymptote is y equals 0. Okay, so we've done our first step. We have our asymptotes. Now, let's find the x and the y-intercept. So recall, we find the y-intercept by putting 0 into x. So let's put 0 in, and we will get 0 plus 2, and 0 squared minus 4, which gives us a positive 2 over a negative 4. And that reduces to negative 1/2. All right, so our y-intercept is 0, negative 1/2. Now, to find our x-intercept, we set the whole thing to 0, but remember what I said in the last video. When it comes to a fraction is only 0 when the top is 0. So let's set the top to 0, and let's solve that. And let's notice that this gives us negative 2. Well, negative 2 is our hole, so there is no x-intercept after all. We always want to cross out the hole if it pops up. Now, let's go to step 3. We want to set our entire equation equal to our horizontal asymptote to see if it crosses its own asymptote. So I'm going to set this whole thing to 0. But that's really what we did when we were finding the x-intercept, because remember, the whole thing is only equal to 0 when the top is equal to 0. So this actually leads us back to x plus 2 equal to 0, which we already know leads to the hole, so we don't have to worry about it crossing its own asymptote. It does not cross its horizontal asymptote. So our last step is to graph this thing, and we might need to do some additional points, but let me go ahead and plot it over here. And let's look at where our vertical asymptote is. It's at 2. So my vertical asymptote is at 2. I'm going to go ahead and make a dotted line, dotted vertical line right here. I know sometimes my little slash marks are getting big. All right, and then y equals 0 is the horizontal asymptote. Here's 0, which means our horizontal asymptote is actually the x-axis. Now, I'm just going to make a dotted line so we know we're not going to cross that x-axis with our two pieces of the graph. All right, now let's plot. The only point we have is 0, negative 1/2. So that would be right about there. Okay, now remember what I said in the last video, that the shape of our graph on the right side of the asymptote is going to be either this or this, and on the left side of the vertical asymptote, it's going to look like either this or this. Well, we can tell what the shape has to be over here, since it's got to go through that point, and it can't cross this, and it can't cross this. The only way we can draw it, that it goes through that point and doesn't cross these two, is to draw a shape like this one. So, there it is, and of course we want to grow, we want it getting closer to our dotted line. Now the other side could look like this, or it could look like this, and we don't know because we don't have any points. So we do need to plot a single point over on this side to see whether or not the point lands up on the top here or down in the bottom here. So 1, 2, let's plot x equals 3 and see where the y value ends up. So I'm going to put 3 back into my original function. I'll do it right up here. F of 3, and that's going to be 3 plus 2 on the top, and 3 squared minus 4 on the bottom. And that is going to give me 5 over 9 minus 4, or 5 over 5, which is 1. Okay, so 3, 1. All right, so if we plot the point 3, 1, that is right there. Now, the only way we can draw a picture going through this point and not crossing these asymptotes is to have a graph that looks like this one. If we drew this one, it would end up going through its horizontal asymptote. So it's got to be this shape. We want it to head toward its asymptote on the left and the other asymptote on the right. And there's our picture. Now, there's one last thing we have to account for, and that's the fact that we had a hole at -2. So we're going to go over to x equals -2. And from -2, if I go down to where it would be on the graph, there should not be a point right here. So what I'm going to do is draw an open circle. Now, usually I would erase it, but I think if I erase it, well, I'll go ahead. Yeah, it erases the whole thing. So let me just redraw. So we really don't want a point right there where our hole is supposed to be. And now our graph is complete.